Hello and welcome to episode 22 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast for the casual spike, focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies in Modern. My name is Stanislav here in Chicago, and with me on the line from Irvine, California, it's the one and only Shane Beeps.
What's up, Stan? It is me, a California boy. I'm going to go surf, hang 10, ride some waves. I'm just on a business trip, and I moved the studio with me, so here I am.
How did you escape? My geofencing on your house went off, and it freaked me out in the middle of the night. You escaped under cover of night, like a Lannister, for crying out loud.
The shock collar got me once or twice, but you just jump through it, and it only hurts once.
Right.
Also with us here in Chicago, the Godfather, Dave Harbarger.
This week, it's me, Dave Harbarger, reborn as the new Living Guild Pack.
Last but not least, it's the Warden, Zach Culhan.
I'm looking into getting the rights to Akon's locked up so we can play that during the intro, but we'll touch on that later.
Who?
It's a reference for the fans. You don't know Akon?
You don't know Akon?
Yeah. Akon and Young Jeezy.
Nope.
This week, the Dive Down brings back a fan favorite. It's our Sleeve It, Believe It, or Heave It episode. This is our first look into some of the new decks popping up thanks to War of the Spark. We also start the show off with a breakdown of the notable results from this week's Modern Challenge and MOCS Modern Monthly. Then we wind down with a listener question. But first, some housekeeping. Shout out to friend of the show, Mabin, all the way down in Australia. Thank you for leaving a kind review of the Dive Down. Very cool to have another fan down under. I will speak on behalf of my co-host to say this weekend was super humbling for all of us. So many of our listeners showed their support by putting some money toward the new Dive Down Patreon.
So this week, we're super excited to shout out all the folks who subscribed to our Patreon so far. We're going to read the names. I'm just going to read people's first names, or their Namda Patreons, maybe as well. So Blue Cheese is that one. Buff Kips, Cact Trot, Chem is Tree Guy. We got Craig, Diano, Dylan, Evan, Hunter, Jacob, Joshua, Nicole, Scott, Joe, and Train. And then two very special shout outs to our friends on Turn 1 Thoughtseize, Aaron and Emma, who have both joined separately. We really appreciate your support, guys.
Oh, yeah, 100%. This is amazing.
Yeah, if you'd like to support the show, you can find our Patreon page at patreon.com/thedivedown, and you too can join the Dive Down Nation.
So, those of you who haven't joined the Patreon might be wondering, so what is Patreon? Why should I care about it? So Patreon is a way for you as a listener to give back a little bit to us in exchange for the work that we put into making this podcast. So we all put in a surprising amount of time in order to make this podcast something that you want to listen to. And we generate absolutely no profit. We have no advertisers. We have no sponsors. So that's where you, via the Patreon, come in. So what you can do is you can choose to give as little as $1 per episode or as much as you'd like per episode. And there are benefits you're going to receive at various price points like pins, stickers, signed cards, and there's stretch goals we have listed on the Patreon page as well, like custom tokens, deck boxes, sleeves, playmats. Of course, the show's always going to be free, but Patreon's really just a way for you to give something back to us in exchange for getting the Dive Down out to you each week. And so our first stretch goal is hiring an editor. And you might ask, why do these guys really want to hire an editor? The podcast already sounds really good. And one reason for that is that either Stan or I are spending a lot of time each week after we record to turn those raw recordings into something that you want to hear on Friday. And it really can take a lot out of us each week. And so what we want to be doing is spending more time play testing, spending more time engaging with our fans, spending time with our families, creating the content that goes into each week's episode. And so hiring an editor goes a long way towards that. And that's why it's our first stretch goal and the one we want to hit really quickly. So again, if you like us, please take a little bit of time to check us out on patreon.com/thedivedown, all one word. We really appreciate all of you.
All right, with all that out of the way, let's jump over to Zach with this week's breakdown.
So for the breakdown this week, we're trying something a little different that we did last week as well. So anytime there's not going to be a big in-paper event or big online tournament, we're going to move away from reading lists and going over where people placed in notable individuals and focus more on spicy decks or interesting things we see propping up. So this won't be a consistent thing. It'll only be when we don't have a big event to talk about.
Yeah, like if we don't have an FCG Open, don't have a GP, don't have an MC even, there's no reason for us to just read down a big top 8 list, right?
Exactly. The information's out there and easy to absorb. We want to focus more on that when there's interesting deck lists or interesting players there, and not more when it's just a 5-0 dump. And those are interesting, and that's why we're going to be focusing on them later in our dive down section. But we want to reserve the breakdown for notable events.
Yeah, this is your chance to get a sense of the pulse on the format, some new tech that's changing up traditional decks, or new decks that are emerging out of nowhere.
Yes,
For sure.
Notable notes for casual folks.
So we're going to be looking at the Magic Online Modern Challenge that happened on May 11th.
Yeah, so there's not a single Arclight Phoenix in this whole top 32, you guys.
Well, what happened was Cersei's giant crossbow shot all the birds out of the sky,
Oh, man.
And then they came back up.
and then they went back down.
So
Yeah.
I don't think this is speaking to the power level of this deck at all. I think people wanted to try all their fun new toys, and I don't think Phoenix got any immediate auto-includes from War. And there are other decks that have more cards you get to use. So I would be surprised if we saw a trend of Phoenix not appearing again. I mean, anything can happen, but I feel like it's a momentary blip, and it'll be back once people have tried out their new stuff and decide what they like and don't like.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil what we're going to be talking about, but I feel like Control players got a bunch of fun toys, so they're out in full force, and then all the busted, Tronny and Prison-y people got some new toys, and they're out in full force.
Oh, yes.
And then Humans is all over the place still.
Oh, yeah, because it's very good.
So this event was actually won by Humans, and the list didn't have too much interesting tech aside from 2 Phyrexian Revoker in the sideboard.
I kind of like this. It's pretty easy to cast off the mana. It can be vialed in response to the casting of something like all these new planeswalkers that are hitting the battlefield lately. So I think it's a smart include in the sideboard.
And it's, I think, a smart include for a lot of people who are looking toward answers for all the planeswalkers that people are testing right now. So if you're struggling against Karn, this might be something that you can try.
So we see an Infect deck make a placement here, which is pretty interesting. We haven't seen that for a while. And it doesn't seem to have too many new choices. There's a Teferi Time Raveler on the sideboard, but nothing else too fancy.
Nothing too big except for I don't think there's ever been a planeswalker in. In fact, has Nissa Voice of Zendikar always been here too?
Yeah, she's there sometimes. Yeah, she makes an appearance.
Ah.
But yeah, the Teferi in the side is pretty interesting. I think when you have as much Tron out there as we're seeing right now, Infect is a pretty smart choice.
What is Teferi doing for this deck, though, do you think?
Well, I think it makes the opponent operate at more sorcery speed.
So if you can get him down and protect it, then on your next turn, you can attack in shields are down,
Exactly.
basically.
They have to kill your stuff on their turn, not your turn, which is very good for you.
Yeah.
And you're probably not casting this card when you need to protect it with one of your 1/1s either. This is probably coming in against control or mid-range decks.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It makes the mid-range opponent choose between removing the Teferi or removing your creature.
Yeah, I could definitely see them bringing this in against like Skred, a mid-range deck that has a lot of point-based removal, because it really makes that less of an open game and a lot more of a linear decision.
I like it. I mean, I don't know if it's game-breaking or anything like that. I think it's smart, and also I think, in fact, especially if Teferi is useful for it, I think it's a perfectly sound choice, like I said before. In fifth, we see Wishtron showing up again. It made an appearance last week at the SCG Classic with a playset of Karn the Great Creator. This one has 0 Thragtusks in the sideboard, so it really doesn't seem to be too worried about gaining more life or dropping the curve post-board in terms of mana disruption too much. But it shows up here as well.
Yeah, I wonder how much Karn factors into that, because Thragtusk is 5, and you can play Karn minus him and play a 1 or 0 mana artifact that same turn. So I wonder how much credence is given to that.
Yeah, just the life gain is so valuable.
We also saw placing here a red prison deck, which is piloted by none other than Fluffy Wolf 2, who is a pretty well-known prison streamer. So this one had the full playset of Karn the Great Creator, and it was running liquid metal coating, which is the new hotness in this deck.
Explain this to me, Zach, because I see it and I see what it does, but I'm like, is this really doing enough?
In my experience, it is, and a big part of that is the deck is up to, I believe, 4 braids right now. So you can turn lands into artifacts with that and blow them up. And that's very good. It can also hit planeswalkers. It allows you to hit anything with a braid, which is very good. Also, what it can do is the super fun tech that I got beat down with is they can make your land an artifact with that, then +1 on Karn and your land dies.
Why does the +1 on Karn do that?
It turns it into a creature with power toughness equal to its converted mana cost. And lands have 0 CMC.
Why did I not get this? Okay, this makes sense.
By the way, it also is tack against other people's Karns.
Yep.
So during your upkeep, you turn their planeswalker into an artifact, and then if you have Karn, the Great Creator, out, they can't activate any of the abilities on it because it's an artifact. So it lets you go around and have anything with an activated ability when you have Karn, the Great Creator, out, and just hit it at the beginning of their turn. And if it's a sorcery speed ability, they won't be able to use it.
Also, it's like a flexible like sorcerer's spyglass or something.
Yeah, so it does a lot of stuff. It lets you, like Zach said, it lets you kill something kill a land with the +1. It lets you braid something if you want to.
But if your opponent has Karn, the Great Creator, out, how do you activate the ability on Liquid Metal Coating?
Ooh, maybe it's not for other people's Karns. Maybe it's just for other people's planeswalkers then. But good point.
I think it has more to do with Zach's point, and I actually did a game against basically Blue Moon that also pulled out a Karn and pulled out Liquid Metal Coating to just start getting rid of my lands.
Yeah, it's very real. I don't know if I totally agree with the 4 braid. I've played with lists like this, and I found 4 to be a little clunky, but he 5-0'd, so he knows what he's doing at least.
Did you guys see this blue-black control deck in 15th? It is wild. It has the new Liliana Dreadhorde General, so Liliana 6. It has 2 Narset Parter Veils. It also has Enter the God Eternals from War of the Spark and Tyrant Scorn. So Tyrant Scorn is like a little bit of flexibility. Enter the God Eternals is like, a big high cost removal spell that gets you a little bit of added value on the battlefield. This deck seems wild.
I've seen blue-black control decks running Grave Titan as a finisher in the past, so I could see where you might swap that out and put a Liliana in. It's a similar mana cost, and she's a little less vulnerable to spot removal.
Also, what makes this deck kind of interesting to me is that it's also playing with the Narset Parter of Veils plus Gyre Reach Sanitarium 2-card combo. So once you get your opponent to 1 card in hand and they're top decking, at the draw step you get to strip their hand every turn.
Ooh, I like that.
You guys notice 2 Surgical Extraction still in the main deck here. Is this forever? Or are people just still worried about Dredge and Phoenix?
I think Tron's really big right now, too.
4 Field of Ruin main deck.
Yeah.
That's how you do it.
Yeah. I mean, Tron's everywhere, so that certainly helps. Especially when Tron's shaving their own Surgicals to protect their lands in the graveyard.
Right.
So Surgical is forever. As long as Tron is around and Field of Ruin.
Maybe.
Yeah, and a deck like this doesn't have to pay the life. It can pay the 1 black, so I think that makes it a little more reasonable, too, as opposed to something like Phoenix.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still just enough silver bullet decks that if you're in a deck that does not feel bad about the card disadvantage from Surgical Extraction, you can still run it, man.
All right, next up, we're going to talk about the Modern MOCS Monthly, which is a qualifier for the quarterly MOCS playoffs that happen on Magic Online.
Or so I read, because you can't honestly tell what any of these actually are, in my opinion.
Yeah, and for this we got the top 32, and there are tons of spicy meatballs all over this spaghetti result list.
In the spaghetti of this result list.
Man, there's just Blast Zone, Karn the Great Creator, Narset Parter Veils, Teferi Time Traveler, Saheeli Sublime Artificer, just everywhere.
Yeah, it turns out Planeswalkers with static abilities in addition to activated abilities are pretty good.
Pretty good. It's pretty good, especially when they can also gain loyalty. Pretty good.
We definitely had trouble deciding this when we were doing the spoiler episode, and so to see it come to fruition a little bit here already, a couple of weeks into this new modern format is pretty interesting. We're just all putting Planeswalkers in, and a big part of it is the fact that a bunch of them cost 3, right?
Yeah, as we keep saying. I mean, and I feel like there's a lot of control decks in this. I feel like, they really seem to have been given some kind of boost with these powerful or semi-powerful or useful 3-mana Planeswalkers.
Right.
And then, Dovin's Veto, a really nice counter spell, seems to be all over the place as well.
Dovin's Veto is very good. I forgot what the first part of that card does, and I put a Chalice on 2 this weekend to try to get around it. And they played it, I went, oh, no. They went, okay, yeah, but it can't be countered. So, like, oh, this card's very good. This is very good for you.
No.
Yeah, exactly. No, but I got no back.
Am I crazy, or does the name of Dovin's Veto plus the art on the card almost ruin it for anybody else? Dave, as my fellow Azorius mage, like, is it just me, or is Dovin's Veto as a card name just super lame?
Yeah, it's really lame. They should have just called it
like Veto.
They should have called it Negrate because it's
Not
better
great.
than Negate. Negrate.
Veto is kind of a cool card name.
They try to avoid doing one-word card names when they can. There's only so many words you can use for stuff like that.
That's why they should get deep into portmanteaus.
I think those become harder in other languages, Dave.
Yeah. Oh, but they don't work in French?
No, I think they historically do not, actually.
So I've heard about Amulet Titan running Karn the Great Creator, and one of the 7-in-1 decks was an Amulet Titan deck with 3 of them. Why not? You make a bucket load of mana, so it doesn't seem to have this huge wish board, but it can snag in engineered explosives, a worm coil engine, a walking ballista, Tormod's Crypt, and of course it has Mycosith Lattice.
Karn is just in everything. Why is Karn in everything?
Oh, we'll talk about that later.
Colorless mana.
Yeah, and that.
It's unbelievable.
Well, 4 generic mana, actually. My apology.
That's okay. I forgive you.
Karn being in everything, I think, also may explain why we have an uptick in control. Because if you're a player who's taking their time to set up some weird Karn play or to cast a Microsynth Lattice that you're pulling with your Karn, that gives the control player plenty of time to set up a counter spell or a better answer.
I agree. And as someone who loves 4-mana Planeswalkers, let me tell you, they are easily countered. So having to tap out on turn 4 for Karn, and they either play a Cryptic or a Remand. I got mana leaked this weekend where it's, I don't have 3 extra mana. Okay, yeah, it's going to the bin.
Well, because you didn't do 1 + 1 + 1 = 7, my friend.
No, I did mountain plus mountain plus mountain plus mountain.
Quad mount.
Yeah.
No. What do you guys... I'm surprised a little bit to see the new Saheeli Rai showing up in some of these 7-in-1 and 6-in-2 control decks. And even like an Izzet Phoenix deck that went 7-in-1 was running, I think, a Singleton.
Yeah, Misplaced Ginger.
Yeah, again, man, that guy is a grinder. He's good.
Yeah, he is.
I guess it just gets value off of all these non-creature spells that decks cast, so you just build up a board of little artifacties. I had her in a draft deck, and she was certainly valuable there in like a blue-red spells deck, so I can imagine in a modern deck with much better and cheaper casting cost spells, it's great.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like a young
Monastery
pyromancer
Mentor?
with a different payoff. More like young Peasy, I think, but the payoff it's got that extra bonus with the -2.
And did you guys see that Budakov, Magic Online grinder extraordinaire? He went 7-in-1 with Sramos even after the London Mulligan's gone because, even without it, he can win, apparently.
Well, Shramos was always a deck, just not a consistent deck. So anyone can run hot. That's half the skill in winning a tournament.
Yeah, you're telling me.
My cold friend. I want to talk again about this Infect list that went 6-2. I wonder if some of the uptick in Infect may have to do with the Karn business I was mentioning earlier, where people are playing these slower control or these slower Karn decks, and the time that they take to set up, Infect just kills you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Infect is still the worst matchup for Tron. So if I saw tons of Tron just in my minimal testing this week, and so, yeah, run Infect.
I also saw quite a bit of burn when I was playing my leagues for the decks we tested out. I don't know if it's clearly not doing too well, but I think that there's an uptake in people playing it. And maybe Infect is just in a better place than Burn right now, which is maybe a weird thing to say, but I don't know.
I still haven't seen Burn in so long.
Serious?
It's funny. It's funny when you I have these conversations a lot where it's like people are like, I've seen so much of this deck, and I'm like, man, I never played against Arclight Phoenix on Magic Online ever.
That's amazing.
I think there was a 2-month stretch where I played at least once every time I went to my LGS.
Yeah. I played against Arclight Phoenix last night.
All right, well, that wraps up this week's breakdown. Up next, we go through 4 new decks that emerged thanks to War of the Spark and discuss whether to sleeve, believe, or just heave them right in the trash. Stay with us. So every time a new set comes out, people love testing with the new cards that emerge. And a lot of new decks seem to be emerging just because of the cards that came out in the set, not to mention existing decks that are getting new toys to play with.
That's right. And so, we wanted to put together a kind of fun, loose format that would let us test a bunch of decks and talk about a bunch of decks on an episode. So, I don't know if listeners remember the edition of Sleeve It, Believe It, Heave It that we did for Ravnica Allegiance. That was episode 9 of the Dive Down.
That's so long ago already.
It really was a while ago. I went back and looked at the notes and was shocked at the date on those. So I just wanted to give a little refresher on what the idea here is behind the rating system. And so everybody has played a deck. They're going to give a kind of little pitch or explanation about what the deck is trying to do, what's new about the deck with the new cards from the set, what their experience was like, and then they're going to give a rating. And then each of us, based on their assessment of the deck, and our own research, are going to give our own kind of rating of the deck.
You know what I love about this is that we can just predict. We predicted that this was going to happen. Like, we had this on our calendar just months, like a month out, and of course we have 5, 6, 7 decks we could have chosen from for all these new cards from War of the Spark. It did not disappoint.
There was no shortage of decks.
Yes.
Yeah, this Ravnica block has been unreal for Modern.
Wow, you're right.
And so here's a recap of what the rating system means. Sleeve It means you're definitely going to try this deck out. You're getting ready to open up your box of Dragon Shields and shove some cards in and jam them against somebody. Believe It means you think it's a plausible deck that you're interested in, that you're going to keep an eye on, but you're not necessarily willing to commit to buy the cards that are in it or think it's a slam dunk for the format going forward. And finally, Heave It is we're going to toss it out the old window.
I'm going to put it in some vintage Ultra Pros with some crimped corners.
So I don't know about you guys, but the deck I selected was because I was initially a believer, and I basically wanted to test the hypothesis that the deck I picked could or maybe doesn't work.
I think that's a great way to think about it. The deck that I selected was because I tried to pick the most ridiculous thing I saw on the list of 5-0s, and I think that everybody has stuff in between here and there.
Yeah, for sure. I went in, with a strong belief in the deck already, so I just wanted to test it. I needed some reps.
Yeah. So we're going to start with Zach.
Yay.
For our first Sleeve It, Believe It, Heave It. Zach, go.
So my pick is the deck 10 rack, which is an evolution of the deck 8 rack. So
lazy nomenclature, by the way.
It's already just added some racks.
So the racks are Davriel. So Davriel is my pick to click for War, and he has shown up in his ancestral home of 8 rack.
Just a can of corn out in the outfield.
Can we call it Davriak instead?
You don't like 10 rack?
Nah, I mean, I'm just trying to stretch for something else. I like these portmanteaus. I don't know if you remember from earlier.
Do you mean 15 minutes ago? Is that what you're referring to? So this is an evolution, like I said, of the deck 8 rack. So for anybody unfamiliar with that deck or needs a refresher, that deck is a mono-black discard-based deck. So what you're doing is you're using hand disruption to take cards out of your opponent's hand, using cards like Liliana the Veil and Smallpox to destroy creatures and mess with resources in a way that your maybe hand disruption cannot, and then use the rack effects to chip away their life total. So what I mean by the rack effects is it's named after one original card called the rack. And what the rack is, it's a 1-mana artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you choose an opponent. So at the beginning of that player's upkeep, the rack deals X damage to that player, where X is 3 minus number of cards in their hand.
Cool. So what are the new cards in this deck, and what exactly do those do as well?
So Davriel is the big addition. He has a rack effect where if the opponent has 1 or less cards in their hand, he deals 2 to them. And then the other big one was Liliana's Triumph as a 2-of. So that is an edict effect that also has a discard tacked on if you control Liliana Planeswalker.
Yeah, so we picked that pretty early on too, so that's seeing play.
Right, exactly. So the changes this deck has made from the typical, and this deck I'm specifically referring to a list that 5-0'd recently. I'm sure there are people doing all sorts of builds with this. This is referring explicitly to the one that came out recently in the 5-0 dump. So the changes this deck has made from 8 rack to become 10 rack is they have cut all copies of Collective Brutality. They have trimmed down on copies of Fatal Push and Thoughtseize, and they are down 1 land to 23, and they are running an extra copy of Field of Ruin. Mm-hmm. So I have wanted to play an 8-rack style deck for a very, very long time. Probably for as long as I've been playing Skred, this archetype's interested me. I chose to buy into Skred and not 8-rack, and that's where we are, but I've always found this very enticing.
I just imagine a young Zach many years ago holding a Raven's Crime and a in one hand and a Skred in the other hand and having to choose.
That's Universe 213B, actually.
Yeah.
I'm in a lot of eyeliner, and I'm a big Crow fan in that universe.
Scrying sheets, collective brutality. I don't know what to pick.
Like I said, I was very excited to play this deck, but ultimately I was pretty let down with this build, and here are some of the issues I ran into when I was playing this deck. So I found that the deck had pretty consistent mana issues, which was bizarre because it's a monocolored deck, right?
This is an insane bullet point to see on your list.
I know.
So wild.
So there are 6 lands main deck that cannot produce black, while there are 9 cards because it's Mutavault and Field of Ruin. And there is the card Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, to make those guys produce black mana, but you don't always see that, and sometimes you're stuck with 2 Field of Ruins and a Lily in your hand. So there are 9 cards main deck that require double black in their mana cost.
We've run the numbers. Here comes Shane Beers with the numbers.
Honestly, Zach, it's interesting to see that even in a monocolored deck, you can have mana problems. And I think that this is just an indication where, sometimes a greedy mana base can 5-0 a league. And like you said, there's 9 cards that require double black. You want to hit double black and a colorless even for a Liliana. And I remember some Carson articles are saying you want to run, I think it's 18 black mana sources to reliably hit even 2 on turn 3.
Right.
So, you can't skimp on your black mana sources even in a monocolored deck if you need to hit double black frequently.
Right, and you really do need that 1 black mana on turn 1 for your hand disruption. So it's not like you can keep a sketchy hand and hope to get there. You really do need probably at least 2 sources of black right away. And I put back some hands that were questionable because I didn't think I'd get my 3rd black. And there are a lot of bad feelings. So tacking on to this point is the deck has, at this build, a very not so good mana curve. This build has 10 cards that are CMC 3 in the main. And it's frustrating to draw a Lily of the Veil or a Bantu's Last Reckoning that would really help you turn a corner and just not be able to cast it. And what's really also not problematic but difficult for this deck is it runs 4 Smallpox. And part of that card is you have to sacrifice a land. So you're already light on land and you require 2 black to cast it. So a lot of times I found myself having to lose one of my swamps and you discard a card too. So I just found that with the way the deck is currently built, there were a lot of times where playing Smallpox was the right play, but then it took me off Lily for a little bit.
Awkward.
I know. But don't worry, I'm going to get to some positives, but I want to get this out of the way.
Okay.
And I think what was the biggest issue for me personally was the lack of removal. So no collective brutality just felt so bad for me. I played against Burn twice in my 10 games, so that factors in definitely. But it just felt like a couple of times I'm like, oh yeah, I can draw that from the top, and no, you can't. There's not a way out this time. There are 3 Fatal Pushes in the deck, but I just felt like maybe 4 was what I would have wanted, and I wasn't a huge fan of Liliana's Triumph. There's only 4 Lilies in the deck, and it doesn't really feel like it's that worth it. I never felt like Edict Effect was what I wanted. I wanted spot removal.
Yeah, I've been kind of hearing a little bit of talk about town of Modern Land saying that Liliana's Triumph is probably not going to be too impactful just because of the reasons you said. It might be a little cute. We don't need edicts in Modern. We're not killing Tree Name Nemesis or something like that.
Exactly. And Boggles isn't really if you have a lot of Boggles in your meta, I would consider this. That's definitely a possibility. But in my 10 games I played, I didn't get the synergy a single time.
That's surprising.
I know. And the final thing is, as we mentioned, Abrade is very popular and there's a lot of artifact hate. So your card, the Rack, is it's able to be blown up in game 1 because people have the hate for it. So it's a card that should just be pretty consistent and hard to remove early, and I found myself getting blown up constantly. So I know that was a negative take, but my experience wasn't entirely negative. I have a few pretty good takeaways as well. So I was really impressed by Davriel. I really, really, really liked him. Him being a 2 and 1 black was very, very good. Like I said, there are times when you have a Mutavault, a Field of Ruin, and a Swamp, and you can play Davriel there. You can't play Lily. And there are a bunch of times where I was able to play him, minus, put them to 0, and then let's go, you're in tap deck mode. So I think that this is, of course, the correct shelf for him. I loved him. I think this deck needs to tweak its converted mana cost a little bit more. I'm not sold on the Ensnaring Bridges main or the Bantus. I think some other stuff could be moved around, but he felt very good. And it feels like he's definitely a step in the right direction for this deck. And to, compound on that, I think that this deck felt like it had a lot of raw power, but the shell it was forced into was not exactly right for it. And, I only played 2 leagues, like I said. It wasn't a ton of experience, but it just felt like the deck wasn't exactly there, but not because there aren't the cards for it, but because the cards weren't put together in the right order.
I'm looking at this list, Zach, and I can see definitely a wide open space where I might want some collective brutalities in the sideboard. Both is going to shore up against maybe some control strategies and also burn strategies where you can, do a dress-like effect, but also, kill one of their small creatures or something like that. I think that you're right. I think it looks like it has some potential, but it doesn't look like it's not tuned just yet.
Exactly. So my final thoughts on the matter is I believed it when I went in. I believed it so hard. Like I said, I've been wanting to play this deck for probably 5 years at this point. I was let down, so it's not a heave. I'm going to leave it on the kitchen counter and come back later. So it's a soft belief.
Yeah, it's a let someone else tune it type
Exactly.
thing.
I think the power level's there. I think it might be a little bit, and it might need a card from Modern Horizons. I'm sure there'll be some low-costed black card people can try. But the deck feels almost there, and Davriel definitely gave it a push in the right direction.
Zach, I wonder if this can be tweaked to be improved with the cards we have now. Because looking at this list, I'm not sure how essential 2 Field of Ruin are. And likewise, I'm not sure how essential 2 main deck Ensnaring Bridge are. Especially in a meta where people might not be running that many humans and might be banking on slower decks that are light on threats.
Yeah, absolutely. Every time I had the Ensnaring Bridge game 1, it never felt good. It definitely feels more like a sideboard card. It's always meta dependent, of course, and if your meta is nothing but merfolk and humans, maybe consider bringing it in. But I did not love it. So I didn't have time, unfortunately, to throw together my own build or anything like that, and maybe that's something we can look forward to in the coming weeks. But I do think there is a nugget to be mined out here.
What does the rest of the team think?
I believe it too. I lost to this deck at a LGS league last week running Davriel and pretty much doing what I mentioned where they had a Ensnaring Bridge in the side. They did get some value out of Liliana's Triumph, but that also may have to do with me playing Grixis in this league and Death Shadow being such a threat-light deck. Liliana's Triumph is a pretty good removal spell.
Yeah, it seems like a great card against that deck because it gets both fish and shadows.
I will mention, though, that I played, I think, in total 4 to 6 games against this person. Part of it was we were testing for the MCQ, and over time I did figure out how to beat it. And I wonder if 8-Rack is one of those decks that's really beatable when you understand your role in the matchup.
I think that's part of what draws me to it, because Prison's similar, right? Where if you know I'm a Blood Moon deck and you can play around it, your percentage goes up quite a bit. I think it does have a pretty big gotcha factor, and it can stress people out as well. I think that if you can sort of take a deep breath and zoom in and not get tilted by your hand being torn apart, it's a little easier to tackle.
Good reminder not to tilt.
Yeah, I'm a believer. I mean, I'm not going to go out and buy these cards, but I think that the deck certainly has, a power level that makes me say, yeah, you can take this in 4-0 at your local game store.
Heave it.
Oh!
Bye.
Wow. Why?
I don't know.
So good?
I feel like this is one of those decks that might not get there.
Are you going to recycle it at least, or just right in the trash? Composting?
I mean, there's a lot of options of what happens to garbage in the supply chain down the road. It depends on if China is interested in buying recycling at this point in time, what the commodities market is like, whether we're going to landfill it and come back for it later,
Dave, those landfills are hermetically sealed. Nothing breaks down in there.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah, we'll see. I think that needs some tuning. I think it's not going to be a tier 1 staple, but I think it can be something you can have some fun with and take it to your LGS and win from now and then for sure.
All right.
So are you a believer as well?
Yeah, I said that.
Yeah. 10-Rack, 3 believes and a heave.
Stan, I'm super hyped to hear yours, man.
Yeah, my deck has many names. On Goldfish, it's just called UB. I've heard people call it Narset Pitch because it runs pitch cards.
Yeah, Narset Pitch.
I've been calling it Blue-Black Narset Prison because I really feel like that's what it's trying to do, is lock the opponent out from playing Magic. So the basic goal of this deck is to get either a new Narset Planeswalker on the board or a Notion Thief, because you're very unlikely to win without either of these. And then once you have either of these two pieces on the board, you strip your opponent's hand with Days Undoing, a 3-mana sorcery from Magic Origins, wherein both players discard their hands and shuffle their hands and graveyard into the library, then draw 7 cards. So the interaction is that with Narset or Notion Thief on the board, the opponent can't draw more than 1 card.
Yeah, so the whole idea, there's a number of cards, right, that like kind of breaks the symmetry of these card draw spells. Is that correct? Or is it only Days Undoing?
Oh, Days Undoing does. Lore Broker does. Gyre Reach Sanitarium does. They're all things that let you basically either draw a bunch of cards and discard or loot in the case of Lore Broker and Gyre Reach Sanitarium.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, and the beauty of this deck is it gets to perform a lot of its actions on the opponent's draw step, which is, I think, one of the most fun features of it and why I took a shine to it.
Yeah. I mean, Vendilion Click, even in this case, if you do it on their draw step, you get to look, take their best card, they don't get a replacement.
Oh, I just realized that one. That's good. Holy crap.
Yeah.
Hey, Stan, so I want to talk about what Notion Thief does because I did not know this. It's an older card. So what Notion Thief is a 2 blue and a black, and it's a human rogue with flash. It's a 3/1. If an opponent would draw a card, except the first one that they draw in each of their draw steps, instead that player skips that draw step and you draw a card. So basically, like Stan said, it just keeps the opponent from drawing more than one card. It's kind of expensive.
Imagine what this card was for, though. So this was in Dragon's Maze originally. This card,
Revelation.
Hot set.
This card was Sphinx's Rev Tech, anti-Sphinx's Rev Tech, supposedly in Standard back in that block. Now, it's nowhere near good enough for that, but...
So one of the cool things about Notion Thief that almost makes it better than Narset is if you cast a Days Undoing with Notion Thief on the board, you draw like 13
cards.
Yeah. And then you have to just discard whatever you want, but that's never really a problem. If you're in that position, I think you're basically set up to win.
Yeah. It's funny when you look at this, it looks a little bit like one of those rules that we've talked about with spoilers before for this deck anyway, which is like Narset and Notion Thief kind of have a redundant effect in some way, which is pretty interesting, where it's kind of like, hey, we had Notion Thief before, but that wasn't enough to make a shell like this work.
You mentioned the enormous hand size, and I see here that a card that is becoming a fan favorite, or I guess a staff favorite here at the Dive Down, is Commandeer. So you can draw 14 cards and then lose 3 of them to take one of their things. Seems pretty good.
Worth noting that Vendilion Click and Notion Thief are in fact your win conditions. The Prison Lock in and of itself will not win you the game. It just prevents your opponent from playing Magic, essentially by making sure they have no, or at least no more than 1 card in hand. But you really need the V-Click or the Notion Thief beats to close it out. The deck also does buy time until you get to the Narset lock with various tempo spells and counter spells. We mentioned Commandeer and Disrupting Shoal as 2 of those tools, Disrupting Shoal being a counter spell. That's flexible, but sometimes it's not good enough depending on what your opponent is casting. So I'm going to start with the good of this deck because it is very, very fun, and I loved playing it. And I gotta say, it felt remarkably strong against combo and control strategies. Because if your opponent is just trying to set up a combo kill or trying to build up a ton of mana toward some kind of planeswalker payoff, by then you either have a lot of time to set up your lock, or you're picking up all the counter spells and tempo spells you need to prevent them from basically landing anything on the board.
Yeah, one thing that I thought was super interesting, I watched Conley Woods play this on stream about a week and a half ago, and he had one game where he went against Tron, where his opponent went natural Tron into Karn turn 3, and he cast Commandeer on it and took the Karn, and then the opponent snap conceded. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, I would.
One of the reasons why I think the lock is strong is because once you have either Narset or Notion Thief on the board, Lore Broker or Gaia Reach Sanitarium like truly feel broken, and they just prevent your opponent from doing anything. Plus, you get to activate them at the draw step, which makes this deck somewhat unique. There were some issues I had with the deck, and they're actually kind of similar to what I heard Zach mention. For one, I felt like the deck had a big problem with wide creature strategies, and if my opponent was able to resolve like more than 2 creatures, that was a pretty big problem. A couple Vapor Snags and Snapbacks never really felt good enough at dealing with creature strategies. I lost to humans and decks like that. Basically, if you go wide enough, the Narset deck, I think in its current shell, just runs out of tools.
Yeah, and blue doesn't have a lot of tools for dealing with that either outside of that, so it's tough to find something to bring in.
Do you think a deck like this could run Cyclonic Rift?
It'd have a tough time getting to 7 mana. Isn't the Overload 6 in a blue?
It is, yeah, it is 7
yeah.
mana. There's the 2 mana mode early, and it's really one of the few board wipes that blue has consistently, but...
Yeah. I think probably if you felt like you really needed a board wipe, that's the best one that you have access to.
Better than Aether Spouts, at least.
Yeah, exactly.
Dave makes a really good point that 7 mana is a lot, and the deck currently is only running 18 lands.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and not a lot of draw spells. So you do get to pitch it, but I don't know. Do you really need to find another 2-drop to pitch to your Disrupting Shoals?
Wait, doesn't the deck have a ton of draw spells?
Not really. So Narset replaces herself, but she only draws you non-land, non-creature spells. Currently, the list only has 2 remand. No cantrips.
But Lore Broker draws you cards. When it's, even when it's an asymmetrical version of it, you still have to discard, so it just loots. It's just card quality then.
Lord Broker draws you and your opponent cards. So I still don't even think that's ideal unless you have the lockdown, because you don't want your opponent to have that level of card selection either.
Right. That's what I mean is like if even when you have the lockdown, it's not card advantage. You just get to loot, which is powerful, but not as good as something that says draw a card. And then also Days Undoing can be really great because you can refill, but you only have so many of those to work from. So I think that's where you get a kind of this huge card advantage, but you don't really get cantrips.
And Days Undoing, again, is symmetrical. Your opponent gets the effect as well, so you're refilling their hand if you're casting this without one of the lock pieces.
Yeah, which you really, really don't want to do. You have to have the lock piece.
Right. I really wish I was able to double spell, and I felt like I practically never could. If I could Narset into Days Undoing, which is only 6 mana, that would feel awesome. But with 18 lands and no cantrips and not a lot of ways to get through the deck to find your lands, that felt generally impossible. Likewise, the deck does run Border Post, but that's not a ramp spell, because you need to bounce a land back to your hand in order to put the Border Post down, or at least to do it for 1 mana, which is where it really shines. And there were some fun plays where I had no land drop and I was able to tap a land, play the Border Post, bounce a land that I tap back, and then play it again. But even that, you're not really ramping. You're kind of just setting yourself for future turns. And the best use I got out of Border Posts were generally pitching them, since they are blue-black.
I have a small hypothetical for you. So you mentioned that there's not a ton of win cons with the deck. You really are trying to beat down with Click or Notion Thief. Would you recommend someone bring in, if they have it, Surgical Extraction against you then?
To target either of those?
Yes.
So they would have to either get Click or Notion Thief into the yard, which is possible. I think sometimes you are using those almost as removal spells because Days Undoing gets them back into your library.
Okay, good point.
But, that's what you would really have to do is surgical both of them.
Sure. What about Narset then? I mean, she seems pretty integral until what this deck's trying to do and a big part of it. Do you think that surgicaling her would be a good move?
Sure. I mean, Notion Thief is there if Narset's gone, but Narset doesn't kill herself when she minuses. She comes in with 5 loyalty counter, and her ability is -2. So a lot of times she just sticks around as an enchantment with a static ability. So again, if you can destroy Narset and Surgical, that could almost lock the Narset player from winning the game. But at the same time, they still have Notion Thief to potentially do a plan B.
Hey Stan, quick question for you. Did you find that sometimes you felt that you weren't able to use Narset for anything but her static? Like if they had a board, if your opponent had like a board that they were going to attack into your Narset, you wanted to keep her static ability active, you just sort of had to play her and not really use her minus?
I have done that. And to be honest, I only tried doing that after I heard Brian Gottlieb suggest doing that. And that's fine. But her being able to replace herself and, in some ways maybe buy you a few points of life, I think could also be valuable. Otherwise, she's a 3-mana do nothing.
No, that makes sense.
I also felt like a lot of cards in the deck almost did nothing and were practically uncastable. So Days Undoing feels really bad if you don't have a lock piece in play. Shoal misses more spells than it counters in a lot of my experiences. Commandeer also really bad against creature decks. And Notion Thief with 18 lands was quite hard to cast. All this being said, my verdict, as much as I wanted to sleeve it, I'm still just a believer. And I really think it needs some tweaking. But the lock felt strong enough and consistent enough that against slow decks, it's really strong and you can pull it off. But against faster decks, it's going to need a different strategy to stay in the game.
Yeah, I'm looking at this list, Dan, and it looks like everything's a little bit more expensive than I think I'd want to be playing in Modern. And it's not just the fact that they're like, just expensive blue spells. I think there's just not enough early interaction here. Like, there's a few Spell Pierce, there's a few Spell Snare, there's like a Singleton Vapor Snag.
Only 2 Remand. And to me, that was crazy. Like, I love Remand in these kinds of decks especially because it buys you a turn if you can cast it on turn 2 or 3, and it gets you deeper into your deck.
I mean, there's a couple of unsubstantiates. I just feel like I think that the balance between all these pieces is still uncertain, right? And I think that that's just a consequence of being such an early build of the deck.
Yeah.
It really feels like the black splash is just for Notion Thief, which is really weird that there's no black removal or even, like a Fatal Push or Collective Brutality or something. It feels like that's really what the deck is missing.
Yeah, it makes me wonder whether the deck can run Counter Squall.
Interesting.
I also wonder if maybe a future version of this deck could turn into Grixis or just blue-red so that the deck can start running either Sweltering Suns as a removal board wipe that you can cantrip, Electrolyze as a blue spell that you can pitch or play for removal and draw a card, or even Is a Charm for kind of the same reasons.
Well, at that point, wouldn't you need a redundant Notion Thief effect? Because that's the whole reason you're splashing black is to get that ability of cutting them off from card draw.
Yeah, but splashing black for a 4-drop seems kind of easy, if you just run enough fetches.
Yeah, you also get Unmoored Ego on the side, so hey.
Yeah, that's important. Unmoored Ego is very strong, I think, in blue-black decks right now. So yeah, in the future, I think the deck needs some more draw spells, maybe going up to 4 Remand and other technology. I can see Border Post eventually getting cut from this deck. The deck does run Blast Zone, and I want to mention that Blast Zone is a great card, and I really think it's powerful, but I'm not convinced that this is a good home for it, because activating it and then blowing it up is really expensive and really hard to do on the same turn. And because you have only 18 lands and you can only do 1 action per turn, I think Blast Zone ends up being a little too slow. Likewise, this is going to sound like a curveball, but people are talking about Force of Will possibly being in Modern Horizons, and if that happens, I think this is going to be a really interesting home for that card. Force of Will could end up warping the entire format and being in all the decks, but this is one of those strategies that needs something a little extra, and Disrupting Shoal just isn't that powerful since so many times you don't have the right card to pitch to it to make it effective, whereas Force of Will is just a catch-all hard counter. What do you guys think? Would any of you believe it?
I don't believe it yet, no. I think that you're right. I think there's something here. I think it's missing another just something. Maybe it needs a board wipe that draws a card or something to that effect. It seems I like where it's at, and I'm a big fan of prison decks, but it feels like it's just missing something. And maybe it just needs to be tweaked more, and maybe the card's already out there. But I feel like in this current state, it's like version 0.5, not even version 1.0 yet.
Yeah, exactly. This deck looks like a mess to me, honestly. I don't know what it's tuned for. I don't know, I think it just looks like a test build, like you said, Zach. It just looks like a very early build. I think that it has potential, sure.
I'm on believe it.
Oh, you're a believer.
I mean, it's got blue cards in it, so
yes, I was gonna say.
Is that all it takes? A single Remand and you're in?
That's a big plus for me. I mean, I did watch that the most of the league that Conley did with this deck, and so I feel like it has some really powerful moments to it. I think he went 4-1 or 5-0 with it on the stream that he did with it, which was pretty interesting to watch. I think you captured most of the gameplay that I think he talked about during that stream too. I just think it's got some powerful stuff going on.
Zach, did you give a believe or
I
heave
did.
or what did you say?
I said heave it, but I will believe it one day.
Yeah, I'm kind of there too. I'm on a heave 0.5, like somewhere in between.
Okay, so Narset Prison, 2 believes, 2 heaves.
On the bubble.
The blue boys versus the not blue boys.
I hope Narset Prison catches on, and then we'll know how impactful we are as a podcast.
So, Dave, what do you have for us?
All right, so I mentioned at the top of this segment that I kind of just went through and picked out the craziest deck I could find that was built around some War of the Spark cards. And I think there's one card in particular that might stand out to people on this list. So I would like to ask you if you are interested in a 6/6 Flying Dragon for 5.
Zach's ears are perking up.
For
I am what you
5.
would call extremely interested. Is this a high interest payment or?
It is a red card, but it's also a white, blue, black, and green card too.
We'll bring all the good colors.
It's all the good colors. It is Niv Mizzet Reborn. So this deck on Goldfish is called Rainbow Niv Mizzet, which is kind of like, okay.
I'm looking at this list on Goldfish, and there are so many color pips.
Yes. So the author of this deck is Cave Dan, who's kind of a well-known brewer. I'm not sure if they stream. They also apparently recently started a podcast about brewing in Modern called Faithless Brewing, which I have not got to listen to the episode where this deck was brewed on it because I just found out about it since I played with this deck.
So they're part of the Faithless family.
Yeah, they're subsidiary of Faithless Incorporated. But here's how this deck works. So basically, this deck is built around the idea of, I'm going to read Niv Mizzet Reborn to people in case people forgot what it does.
Yes, please.
So Niv Mizzet Reborn is
in case they probably never knew.
Well, it's got really sweet art, and I think it's a pretty important part of the story. So I think people probably looked, and it's a mythic from the most recent set. So I imagine people are somewhat familiar with it. But here's the deal. It costs Wooburg. It's a 6/6 Flying Dragon. And here's what the rest of the text says. It says, when Niv Mizzet Reborn enters the battlefield, reveal the top 10 cards of your library. For each color pair, choose a card that is exactly those colors from among them. Put the chosen cards into your hand and the rest at the bottom of your library in a random order.
So at most, you can actually pull 10 cards if you find a card of each guild.
Correct. And that's the thing that this deck aims to do, which is how fast can I get out a Niv Mizzet Reborn, cast it, and then draw 10 cards out of my library, or as many cards as I can. Now,
this is the timmiest card I have ever seen.
You were talking
real
smack
deck.
about how you don't play EDH, and I'm looking at this deck list, and this is just someone's EDH deck that they threw together in Modern.
That they cut out 40 cards.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, but here's the thing. This has been on the 5.0 deck, competitive 5.0 list twice now.
Oh my gosh.
I'm not saying
in
it's
2
not
of the
good. I'm
dumps.
saying it's an EDH deck.
Well, I'm saying it's not good, but but I've played it, so you listen for a minute.
Sure.
Then you can say it's not good. Actually, I don't know. Like, it was a pretty confounding deck. I mean, so like I said, this deck is trying to figure out how fast it can cast Niv Mizzet Reborn, draw a bunch of cards, and then kind of just have massive card advantage. The thing that's really hard about this deck is that the card choices that you have to make in order to kind of have it play with the guild idea actually limits the choices of things you can have. So, here's what's in this deck. Would you be interested in a deck that has Assassin's Trophy? Sure. Is it Charm?
Yes.
Lightning Helix?
No. Yes.
And Kolaghan's Command all in one deck.
Yes.
I would be interested if you could also throw in a Bring to Light, a Supreme Verdict, and or even a Thought Erasure.
I won't get out of bed for anything less than a detention sphere.
Does it have Safe Rate Quest, though? That's the question I want
Yes.
to know.
That's a card I had
The
not
answer
seen before this, which I think is really interesting. But here's the thing is that some of these cards are really calculated for what they're supposed to be, right? So there are no Simic cards other than Bring to Light in this deck. And that's a big part of the whole thing, because if you draw a Bring to Light off of a Niv Mizzet and someone kills your Niv Mizzet, you can probably use Bring to Light to search up another Niv Mizzet and do the whole thing again. So you're pretty much guaranteed to always just draw that as your Simic card. You know, you're going to draw a Lightning Helix almost every time. You're going to draw an Assassin's Trophy quite often when you get it to hit. And so you do get a lot of really powerful cards, and Bring to Light also gives you a little bit of a utility package where you can kind of use Bring to Light to search up your Supreme Verdict, or use Bring to Light to search up Unmoored Ego in Game 1 if you want to make sure that you have that, which I actually got to do against someone who was playing Amulet Titan, where I just turn 4 actually, I ramped into Bring to Light, got Unmoored Ego, and took all their Primeval Titans right away while they were in the middle of trying to do some crazy stuff.
So Dave, I'm looking at this deck list right now and looking at all the color pips like we're talking. It seems like a deck like this would have mana problems. Is that something you experienced? I see that there is the 4 Birds of Paradise, but it just seems like trying to decide what to fetch for or what to keep seems really difficult.
So trying to find so you're totally right that in my experience, it was really difficult to figure out what to fetch and what lands to keep and what lands I should get when I had access to things. Fortunately, there's a little bit of kind of grease on the skids with this deck because it runs 3 Mana Confluence, which is, if you remember, that is basically the modern sort of templated City of Brass from Journey into Nyx. And then it also runs a card called Pillar of the Paruns, which I don't think people really remember, which is it's a land, and it just says tap to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to play a multicolored spell. So it's a 5-color land with no drawback other than the fact that you have to use it to cast a gold card. And guess what? Everything in here except for Inquisition of Kozilek and Birds of Paradise is a gold card, is a multicolor card.
Yeah, so, it's fun and on theme too. Niv Mizzet was one of the Paruns, and his signals on there, so it's a very flavor win.
Exactly. Definitely, that was one of the best parts of this deck, was that it was very on theme for flavor for me. So I don't want to dunk on this deck too much because it was actually really fun to play, and once I got a little bit of practice with fetching lands, I played Tribal Flames Zoo a couple of times right around the same time that kind of towards the end of the year last year. So I had a little bit of practice in figuring out like what's the fastest way for me to get over to 5 colored lands and kind of go from there. But I think that ultimately this deck, the main problem I had with this deck was it was just kind of like too slow. Like even as cool and powerful as chaining Niv Mizzet into another Niv Mizzet was, even as powerful as having access to all these multicolored spells was, a lot of times I felt like there were a lot of cards in here that were just kind of like awkwardly placed so that you would have something to draw if you hit off of Niv Mizzet.
Dave, do you think this is a deck that benefits from London Mulligan?
I don't. Actually, I don't know if it would make that much of a difference. I think you would probably hit Niv Mizzet more often, but the problem I had more so was it was hard to get it down earlier than turn 4, which is fine, but there's much more powerful things that happen in Modern than a 6/6 flyer that draws you 5 cards. As crazy as that sounds, mostly because you have to take off the entire turn to be able to get those 5 cards, and then when you untap, you often have kind of unclear targets for the things that you're supposed to, for the cards that you did draw.
How often were you able to cast a turn 1 Birds of Paradise?
I mean, basically whenever I drew one. I think the problem that I had was trying to figure out how much I should be kind of mulling to try to get turn 1 Birds of Paradise. One card that actually impressed me a tiny amount in this deck was Domri, Anarch of Bolas, which is interesting because it's just sort of a nice kind of ramp card in this. So basically this Domri is 1 red-green for a 3 loyalty planeswalker. Creatures you control get +1/+0 as a static ability, but the only thing that really counts here is +1, add red or green. Creature spells you cast this turn can't be countered. So that was a much more consistent way. I found that I drew into that much more often, or had that available on turn 4 to use for one of the pips for Niv Mizzet a little bit more often than the Birds of Paradise really mattered all that much. Now, the problem that I had with this deck was not the like clearly powerful spells, but it was the cards like 2 Inquisition of Kozilek feels like a weird kind of fit to me. The Safe Right quest was good as a piece of kind of mana fixing, but it often just felt like kind of a wasted card. Counter Squall was an awkward draw, often out of the main, where there's a lot of decks where it's just not any good, or I would draw it too late and it just would be something that just kind of sat in my hand. Thought Erasure, it seems like a card that I would love to be good in Modern because it's a sweet effect. Plus, it has a cool, with the Surveil mechanic. That's a great mechanic, but it's just kind of expensive for the effect that it has in Modern. So there was just kind of a lot of cards here that I felt like weren't quite doing enough to pull their weight, even with the power of tutoring from Bring to Light and things like that. Now, there's a good chance that I just don't really know how to play a Bring to Light deck the right way. But to me, it felt like the speed and kind of complication of the deck didn't really make up for the power level. So for me, I would probably put this in the Heave It category. But I don't know what you guys think after listening to me talk about it for a couple minutes.
I am kind of fascinated by this deck. I just keep looking at this list. I just keep looking at it, and I'm like, I see the thought process behind all these 2-color combinations, right? And it's like, well, what am I going to run in this color combination? What am I going to run in this color combination? And you can see how there's a lot of stuff to choose from, and so it seems kind of flexible in that way. It's like just a weird guild toolbox deck. But you also have to cast a 5-mana creature spell.
So, Dave, are you mostly winning just by beating down with Niv and then maybe getting some extra damage off Lightning Helix or Colligan's Command?
Yes. Yeah, you're basically trying to kill with Niv Mizzet.
To me, that's the most problematic issue. Like,
Niv is canceled.
Well, I love Bring to Light strategies, and it seems so powerful and a great way to cheat powerful effects into play. But when you only have 1 win condition, that also makes the deck wildly vulnerable.
Yeah. It's almost like Bring to Light should have pushed a little bit more into creature cards that are the guild combinations instead of so many spells to just give you a little bit more of a kind of some other resilient threats, things like that.
Yeah, because what are you doing if your Niv Mizzet gets Unmoored Ego'd?
Dying, I'm sure. It didn't happen to me, but it definitely would have been a real problem.
I even feel like just getting your Niv Mizzet just counterspelled, you know what I mean? It's just like, it's not a cast trigger. I mean, this isn't an Eldrazi. He has to resolve to do the 10-card trick. You're kind of telegraphing this 5-mana Niv Mizzet spell. I mean, the Domri lets you cast it uncounterable, but it's not like you can run Cavern of Souls or something like that.
Naming Avatar.
Yeah.
The Last Airbender. Maybe Kaya or Zav Usurper is the plan B win condition because that card is bananas.
Yeah, but it's not good against every deck. And this deck isn't really set up to have it be, it's not really a control deck, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
This
There's
feels
no
like it's trying to be right. There's nothing that's kind of exile a whole bunch of cards. There's a couple of Rest in Peace in the sideboard. So if you're going to play against that kind of strategy, then of course you would keep Kaya in and have that be part of your strategy. But yeah, to me, it just felt like the plan was kind of unclear with this deck. Now, again, I'm probably going to go back and listen to the podcast from the author of this deck to see what thought process led to this getting there, especially since it's gotten a couple of 5-0s. But to me, it felt like pretty confusing.
Yeah, I played against this deck in one of my leagues, and it was not against the individual that invented it. It was somebody else. But when they first played Niv Mizzet, I went, oh, what's happening? They're drawing so many cards. But then I, no joke, played a Blood Moon, and I ran away with the game because their mana base is very, very weak to Blood Moon.
Yeah, that's a great point, too.
Yeah, and that's my deck. That's, how things worked out, and not everyone runs main deck Blood Moon. But I just found like it was a little too slow and a little too soft to hate. Maybe the pilot just wasn't as good as the individual. It's getting all these 5-0s, but I currently do not believe it.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to sound crazy, but I kind of believe it. And only because I want to. I mean,
that is key, man. I'm with you.
I just want to. I want to believe it. I'm not, nowhere near a sleeve it. I'm not buying a bunch of I do have a number of these cards, surprisingly, but I'm not going to go out and buy more of them. But I think it's just fun. I think that this is going to be one of those decks that, it's going to be, if it's not already like an against the odds deck from Saffron Olive and MTG Goldfish, it's just something that I think people can, like Zach said, it's like a constructed EDH deck.
It sure is.
It's quite affordable by modern standards. You can buy the whole deck from Card Kingdom for $400.
What a world we live in.
That's affordable.
Yeah.
By modern standards.
So we got 3 Heave It's and a Believe It? Or did you not give a rating yet, Stan?
I think I'm a believer just because I think Bring to Light is strong, but I am also highly skeptical because a single win condition is not where I want to be in Modern. And there is Creeping Tar Pit, don't at me, but it's just the one Creeping Tar Pit. Maybe Creeping Tar Pit plus all the removal/control spells that you're running in your 25 card spell suite is good enough.
Yeah, I was also concerned by the lack of creature lands. Maybe there's some sort of thesis or treatise. I haven't read about why they've only decided to use one, but I feel like a deck like this could benefit from more. Who knows? I'm not a brewer.
Do you mean treatise?
No, I don't.
Okay. I just wanted to check.
So to use a Shane term, I'm like a 0.5 on the believe scale.
A beta believer.
I got to be honest. I'm shocked that Zach and I are the two doubters here, and you guys are like, yeah, let's run this crazy game.
Well, this just goes back to our conversation, Dave, where it's just, decks I like just mean I can have some fun playing them. So I don't think it's that good. I honestly think it's probably a Heave It in terms of competitiveness, but it's certainly a believe in my heart.
I wonder if the 5-0 that Cave Dan got had something to do with the fact that opponents just had no idea what the player was up to and how to deal with it.
What are they doing? Why are they drawing 10 cards? What's happening right now?
Why did Niv Mizzet die in the first place?
Do you want to go into some lore? Or?
No.
No, me either.
All right.
Shane, what's your deck?
Oh man, you already know what this is. This is Wishtron, my friend. Because Karn the Great Creator is already seeing all this early success in Greentron.
Can we talk about how many decks this card is in?
So many.
It's in every deck.
So many decks.
You should just be playing Karn right now the way people used to play Git Probe.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's that ubiquitous.
It will
I
be.
think there's something to that, but let's talk about that for a minute. So by my count so far, and you guys can add to this list. So there's Greentron. There's Bluetron that I think was also running Karn, yeah?
Sure is.
There's
Yeah.
Colorless Eldrazi that's also running Tron, or running
Sure.
Karn. There's Amulet Titan that was running it. There is Red Prison that's
War
running
Prison.
it. War Prison / Lantern.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the Mox Amber deck that we've seen floating around a little bit that's sort of like Planeswalkers and White Legends.
I saw it in Blue Moon.
That's right.
I've also seen builds using Arbor Elf and Utopia Sprawl in combination with Ponza Land Destruction. So you're blowing up their lands, playing a Karn, and then locking them out with Lattice when they have like 2 lands in play.
Yes.
I know that because it happened to me. I had 2 lands in play and they locked me out.
Okay.
I saw Tooth and Nail play it, similar to Ponza, less of a land destruction package, but still a big mana deck.
So
Okay.
is it 10? 10 the number of decks
That's
right now?
10 that I counted just now. 10 different decks that have tried running just a straight up play set of Karn the Great Creator, or 3 of them, mostly to kind of cheese into the wish board, but also mostly to try to lock people out with Mycosynth Lattice if there's nothing they can do about it.
Yeah, that's wild.
So, guys, what usually happens when 10 or more different strategies that share basically nothing in common except the fact that they're playing this catch-all card because of how valuable it is? What happens to cards like that?
I think you're jumping
People
the gun.
figure out ways. People figure out ways to beat them.
They go up
No.
in price is what they do.
Yes,
MTG,
that's
Finance,
true.
buy your copies now.
So anyway,
Yeah.
Shane, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience playing this deck, and then Stan, I think we should get back to your question.
I'll remember my question.
No,
Please do.
I'm on board with that conversation for sure. So I have a lot of experience playing classic Greentron. It's already the classic version. So I wanted to take this new build for a spin through some leagues. I actually, like I said last week, I tested it with kind of like a super light Karn splash almost, just like 2 Karn the Great Creators and a couple sideboard cards. But this was more all in. So, briefly to summarize, so Karn the Great Creator, he costs 4 colorless mana, or it costs 4 colorless mana. It comes down with 5 loyalty, and is -2 allows you to wish for artifact cards in your sideboard. So you can use this to get necessary or needed artifact cards from your sideboard in any game you're playing.
It's not just your sideboard. It's also cards in exile, which is a really... Yeah, exactly. Because it's cards you own from outside the game. And that includes exile.
I like it.
I saw someone, Relic of Progenitus, you can exile your graveyard, and then Karn can go ahead and grab cards from an exile pile as well.
Oh my gosh!
I know.
I probably could have used this. Like I didn't even think about that little interaction. And so people are using the new Karn to get anti-graveyard cards, ability cards like a Sorcerous Spyglass or a Pithing Needle, a Crucible of Worlds to handle land destruction, a Witchbane Orb to be granted hexproof, and also to remove curses. Don't forget that fun interaction. You can get a Walking Ballista to like ping down an opponent's board or get around an Ensnaring Bridge that's out, things like that. And the most busted feeling one that Dave mentioned earlier is Mycosynth Lattice, which is a 6 CMC artifact, and when that's on the battlefield, it turns everything on the battlefield into an artifact, as well as its other types, and which in combination with Karn's static ability makes them unable to be tapped for mana on your opponent's side. So what Karn's static ability does is it activated abilities of artifacts your opponents control can't be activated. So note, it does not say unless they are mana abilities or something like that. So just strictly, it straight up turns everything off on your opponent's side. So on an empty board or one where you've been controlling the board and have sufficient like blockers up for your Karn, this can essentially just be good game and your opponent can't do anything. Another new card that people have been running in Greentron now is a Blast Zone as their utility land in place of a 5th Forest. We talked about that in our spoiler episode as well. This is another really good addition to Tron, I think. It can be fetched up with like one of your land tutor abilities. It can be pumped up to handle things like land hate on the other side of the battlefield, or clear a bunch of creatures, or do both at the same time. And so in my build, which there's a link in the show notes, I put in 4 Karn the Great Creator, went down to 2 O-Stone, 2 Relic of Progenitus, 2 Walking Ballista, and removed the World Breaker to make room for those 4 cards. And the wish board I selected, which is based off of looking at a few of the recent like 5.0 lists and the SCG Classic list and things like that, was a Grafdigger's Cage, a Sorcerous Spyglass, a Crucible of Worlds, an Ensnaring Bridge, a 3rd O-Stone, a Trinisphere, a Witchbane Orb, a Mycosynth Lattice, and that left in room for 3 Nature's Claims, 2 Thought-Knot Seer, and 2 Thragtusk, which are kind of part of the classic Tron sideboard. So yeah, that's you definitely do shave down the sideboard a lot, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but that's kind of where you are with like a Wish Tron right now.
So the headline here is Tier 1 deck gets better. Is that what you're saying?
That was more like my conclusion, but it can also be the headline as well. I think that's kind of a good summary.
And so what was it like actually adding this dimension to the deck as you kind of play?
It doesn't really change how the deck plays. It plays really similarly to the regular old Tron. Like your early game is make Tron, make Tron, make Tron, and then you use your mana to do busted things. But now you just have kind of this new angle to do some busted things with. Like tutor up these needed hate cards. It can tutor up these prison cards. It can tutor up creatures that you need. Like I've seen Worm Coils in the side, or Wraths like your O-Stone or something like that, right? And so one of the things that I think is it's not super straightforward. Like you don't just like nail a Karn the Great Creator on turn 3 after making Tron and like get the piece you need to win, right? Because you have to think about a few things like, can you create some kind of lock immediately by like minusing Karn, grabbing some kind of artifact, and then casting it that turn? So like if you have 7 mana, you can potentially cast something like a Grafdigger's Cage or an Ensnaring Bridge with the 3 mana you have left over. And that can do a lot, certainly, but sometimes your hand isn't low enough with an Ensnaring Bridge to really stop your opponent's battlefield. from attacking in and then just killing your Karn or something like that. But you can do something typically, right? So you have to think about that. Ideally, when you have access to 10 or more mana, you can and have controlled the board, which Tron does very well. You can just lattice the opponent, right? And that, in my experience, has caused an immediate scoop. Like I played 7 matches in my testing, and 4 games in those 7 matches I was able to do the lattice lock, and the opponent just immediately had to scoop because they had no options.
Can we take a moment, since you've mentioned lattice, to consider what a player can do against lattice?
They can float mana.
Do you just have to float mana, hope you have either an abrade or counter it?
Yeah, I think it's a big reason why Mono Red Control is running 4 Braid right now.
Yeah, and people are already talking about Hercule's Recall being really valuable right now.
That's funny.
The other aspect of this that I think you shouldn't forget about is that you can, if you have creatures out, you have to do it into a place where there's nobody that can pressure into Karn. Because if you kill Karn, the lock goes away as well. So that's another thing that can work.
Yeah, and creatures can still attack through the lattice. It's not an activated ability to swing.
Yeah, you can't just slam a lattice and then the opponent's going to scoop, because like I said, you have to really have controlled the board somehow, or have like some blockers out so that they really can't get through into your Karn. So when you lack experience like I do, it's not really easy to wish for a card always from your sideboard or from exile. So like what you think is correct might not always actually be. Like there's definitely instances where I think I should have grabbed something like a Crucible of Worlds, but kind of greedily got something else that wasn't really actually as valuable at the time.
Yeah, a similar thing happened to me when I was, not for this episode perhaps, but I've been playing games with Karn with the Mono Red Prison. It's very similar where I play him and want to just grab Lattice because I know that's a lock, but he has to live for that lock to work. So it's really more important, if you're going to play him and he's not going to stick around, grab a more impactful artifact. Grab a Spyglass, grab a Crypt, grab something that's going to be better if you think that you need to play him and he's not going to live as well. And of course, it's different when a deck with a lot of big mana, when you can maybe play him, minus him, and play the card. But I find it's very easy to get very greedy with this card, and you will be pretty punished for that.
And not only greed, Zach, I think it's also kind of just like you really have to have some experience to know how to use the cards in the best way. And I think Sorcerer's Spyglass is kind of the number one for me, because it's like a very powerful but also pretty narrow card, in that you have to you have to name just one card, right?
Right.
And that's something that I was identifying in the sideboard as, is this worthwhile? And I think it definitely is, but it really requires some skill and experience to know how to use well and what's going to be the most advantageous play there.
Absolutely. And I ran into situations where I would want to bring it into my main, but when you do that, Karn can't grab it anymore. So I wanted to see it because I was playing against decks like Control, where I wanted to be able to, name a Jace or Teferi, but then I would draw Karn and go, oh, minus Karn. Oh, I brought them both in. And I don't know if I made the wrong play there. Obviously, it was wrong to minus Karn because I didn't have the card there, but I don't know if I was wrong to bring the Spyglass into the main.
Yeah, I did the same thing a couple times as well. Karn the Great Creator really feels like a good chance for some card advantage, because you can wish a couple times unless the opponent can get it off the battlefield, and then it has the added benefit of being that one-sided Stony Silence, which can be annoying to your opponent in the meantime, like if they have some artifacts out that they want to be using. But I think the hardest thing is really deciding on that sideboard and that wishboard package, right? Like, some cards I want to run by you guys is Trinisphere, right? So Trinisphere is a 3-mana artifact, and it makes any spell that costs less than 3 cost at least 3 CMC, right? And so every time I wished, I was like, well, I don't need Trinisphere. Like, when would I need Trinisphere? And it just feels like maybe versus like a Phoenix deck or like a Storm deck, it feels like a backbreaker. But like if Phoenix is in the downswing and Storm is a tertiary player anyway, what do you really need Trinisphere for?
So I brought in Trinisphere against Phoenix, and it was very good for me. Having their cantrips be their entire turn was very good, and having them not be able to have removal and draw was powerful. It kept them off getting a Phoenix back as well. Of course, that's very specific to that one deck. I think Trinisphere is not as good versus many other decks, but I think the decks that it is good against, you do want that extra silver bullet for.
Yeah, I think it's worthwhile. It's one of those things where I haven't seen enough use for it, so it's just seeming like a dead weight in there. What was surprising to me is Ensnaring Bridge proves somewhat difficult to use because you have to have your hand size low and to keep those opposing creatures from bashing in. But you also have to have like these alternate win cons in place since your creatures can't attack either. And so like this is where I'm going to get to this later, but I really wanted like a walking ballista in my sideboard because then I could have just played it and then pumped it and then pinged my opponent and then repeated it just to get around the no attacking clause. And that was definitely an oversight on my part. Like I said, the lattice combo seems busted. It really gets the opponent to scoop when you can get that lattice through like counter magic, or if they're not a counter magic deck, you just slam it and they often have to scoop. Blast Zone felt awesome. It felt very natural for the deck. You can get it with those land tutors, and you really can easily get it to like a 2 or even a 3 to get things like Damping Sphere and Stony Silence, and it incidentally gets like some smaller creatures or something like that. Some issues I ran into is the Tron mirror is everywhere. Tron mirror is everywhere. It still just feels like a Tron race when you're playing that deck, which is, ideally just to start stone raining with Karn. I played 3 Tron mirrors in 7 matches, and I know people I've been talking to say they've been playing tons of Tron.
Well, the nice thing about the Tron mirror is once you get Lattice online, all you have to do is count decks to see who'll deck first, and that's how you determine the winner.
Yeah, so, I really didn't identify a great sideboard card here for the mirror. And, Sorcerer's Spyglass seems like it can do something, but any ideas you guys have?
This is a little bit of a wild take, and it's not an artifact. It's not even a wishboard card. But what about Moonvolley, Acid, Moss?
Isn't that a double green?
Yes, it is.
It is.
Well, I'm not casting that.
Oh, well, never mind then.
It just seems like I didn't know what to do in the mirror, and because the mirror is so prevalent, I might need to kind of reach out to people who have been testing this more than I have. It's still really challenging to face down blue-white control, and which I think is growing in power. You really have to play really carefully, really thoughtfully, and honestly just cross your fingers that they can't counter the spells that you're casting against them. I think right now that blue-white control is positively favored against Tron, which is kind of crazy to say.
A huge reversal in the last 4 or 5 months.
It's frustrating. It's scary. It just feels like they always have it when I play them, but I'm sure they always feel like I have it against them. If you slip in a Crucible of Worlds, it can really help against the land destruction, but they seem to have the card advantage on the counter spell package that really does a lot for them.
They play Crucible too sometimes.
I've also been seeing a lot of blue-white control decks running main deck Surgical, so we are in that era still.
Yeah.
Especially with Field of Ruin, it's a pretty gnarly combo.
And, you really do nerf your sideboard, and so I'm not sure how weakened that sideboard is, like, in the long term, and I think that really needs to be felt out over time. So, with my deck, I'd probably definitely add a Walking Ballista to it. I've wanted to fetch one of those up more than a few times already. I think it was an oversight to not have one in my sideboard, and I think I need to have some conversations with people who are testing and just kind of, like, talk about the strengths and weaknesses of all these wishboard cards. I think if you play this deck, you can't. This is one of those things we talked about this a while ago about sideboarding. Is you cannot just blindly copy this sideboard and without knowing what every card is going to be doing in it. Like you have to have an idea of when I'm bringing this card in what situations, what is it going to do for me, where is it valuable? Because like you can't just be like me and just be like, well, is Trinisphere good here? Because you have to have a good idea of when it is.
Is that what you think you sound like?
I don't know what I sound like.
You should listen to the podcast sometime.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's just, I gotta be doing other stuff. I gotta edit.
He's got a really busy life.
He has to listen to it many times while he edits it, just like you.
Overall, I think this is awesome. I think it's only adding to the power of Green Tron, like you said, Dave. But it also puts a target on the deck even more than ever before. Tron is everywhere right now. So I'm a huge sleeve it right now.
I think it's for this one. I wonder if I'm going to say that my sleeve belief Heave rating is not necessarily based on new Karn Tron, but Karn himself. Because I think that Tron's clearly a sleevable deck, right? It's a top tier amazing deck. So I think for Karn the Great Creator, sleeve. I love this card so much. I bought my 4 copies right away. I'm going to play it in Blue Tron. I'm going to play it in Mono Red Prison. I might even try to throw it in my other decks. Who knows? I love this card. It is so very good.
This is clearly a sleeve it. especially with the way the results are, the way that the like Zach said, the way that how often this card is showing up and this package is showing up, I think it's super real.
Yeah, but in your heart, it's a Heave It for you.
I mean, I'm not going to play Tron, so I'm fine.
Stan, what do you think?
Ban it.
Yeah, I mean that's yeah.
Hey, Stan.
Yes.
Remember how earlier you were talking about what happens to cards that end up in this many different decks with the same package?
I have no memory of saying this.
Oh, you were kind of like, what happens
Wasn't me.
when...
He was like, bro, like, what could even happen? Like, if that many cards were in one deck?
Did you ever think about how many cards are out there?
Was it you on the bathroom floor?
You guys ever look at your hands and wonder about all these cards?
Was it? It wasn't you on the sofa?
It wasn't me.
I think that those cards become Splinter Twin, by the way, is my take.
Reducing deck construction.
Yeah.
Well, and also remember, it wasn't only diversity. It was that people were just taking the combo package and jamming it into lots of different decks. So we had Temur Tarmo Twin. We had Grixis Twin. We had Red Twin. Yeah, so good. So, I mean, there is a little bit of potential here, I think, for that to happen, especially since the entire package that's associated with this is colorless. And that's just wild to me.
Alarm bells are definitely going off for me. And I love this card, and I've already purchased mine, so I hope that I have a little more time. And it is very new to the format, and maybe its popularity will die down, and only, the established decks will run it. But I think the writing's sort of on the wall for me at this point. And I think right when I started playing against it, I sent a message to the group chat that I think this card's going to be banned. And it was, oh, it's fine, it's whatever. But I think now that all of us have got to regale in the splendor of our Lord and Creator, we see that death rides a silver horse.
Sometimes the sun shines a little too brightly off of someone's metallic skin.
Hide.
It just feels like it's doing too much. I mean, it's super flexible. I mean, wishing is super powerful. It just kind of skirts around a few issues. When you combine it with the mana, especially that Tron produces or Amulet Titan produces, it just does so much.
Yeah, I'm surprised there's not a colorless mana pip in the mana cost there. Maybe 3 into colorless would have made it a little less degenerate. I mean, I could still run it, so that's very good for me, and so could Tron, but I think it would have less the ubiquitousness that it has now. So, who knows, but that's not the world we live in, and it is 4 mana of any color.
Yeah, we'll see. I hope that I get mine from Russia before it's banned. I probably have like 3 weeks before it shows up.
Stan, do you think this encapsulates your feelings about it, or?
100%. The card is very powerful. I'm not saying I want it to be banned. I, for one, prefer when cards don't get banned. But we've seen what happens when these things happen. So I just think the writing is on the wall. Unless we find really good answers in Modern Horizons or in future sets, I think this is a deck, or at least a card, that I would be a little nervous about buying into, and at least having some awareness that the fun may not last forever.
Now you tell me.
Do you think it's that card, or do you think that just Lattice would be taken away as the prime toy for causing locks?
I feel like with Wizards' track history, it'd probably be Lattice first, because they tend to ban those cards and not the enabler, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what's interesting about your question is I think both of those cards are set up to kind of do broken things.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, they're not going to ban both, but Karn seems a bit more problematic, whereas Lattice is still a 6-mana card that, you have to set up to make it work or do anything useful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw a comment on the Modern Magic subreddit that was they don't ban 6-mana cards, but I guess there's a first time for everything, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I have one last question about new decks of War of the Spark before we move on. And that is,
yes.
Why did nobody choose to play the Neoform combo deck?
It looked hard.
What do you guys think about that?
I don't want to win turn 1. I just want to play a Blood Moon on turn 1.
Okay.
I don't like combo decks.
Okay.
I also just needed to see what the evolution of one of my favorite tournament decks is.
So was I the person who was supposed to play the Neoform combo deck, and instead I played an Invisit? Is that what happened?
Probably.
I mean, did you guys play against that deck at all?
I played against it once. I mentioned that last week.
No, I did not. I played against a couple Grishal brand decks, but one was just classic Goryo's Vengeance stuff, and then the other one was also classic Goryo's Vengeance stuff, but in a slightly different color combination.
No, I didn't see it at all. I played 10 rack and played only aggro decks.
Interesting.
Yeah, it didn't work out so well.
Well, I mean, I don't know what our feelings about that combination are now. It still feels like that is also on the block to be corrected through some kind of regulation. But
it's like when you pull the blanket over your head when you're a kid so the monsters can't get you. If I don't see it, or I don't think about it, it can't hurt me.
Perfect.
I think there's a takeaway from all of our conversations, which is...
We're good at calling cards.
But not only that, but all 4 decks we talked about are playing with these powerful new Planeswalkers.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if people are going to keep doing that, you need to have a plan to deal with Planeswalkers.
Yeah. I mostly think that this discussion today, kind of the flip of that, just proved, like we said at the top, how powerful a set full of Planeswalkers could be, especially when they tweak the formula for what they could be. So all these add-on abilities that looked like kind of small and inconsequential and like they didn't really do that much when we were reading the spoilers actually have profound effects, I think. Even the ones that seem really subtle, like you can't search your library. Like tons of the decks that are out there right now are running the new Ashiok.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seems good, you know? Even though you don't want to use the activated ability at all, you just want to use the static.
Shuts down a lot of very good decks. I'm seeing even like rock players have it in their sideboard.
Do y'all think this could lead to a bit more resurgence for Abrupt Decay?
Yeah, I think Abrupt Decay could be cool. I mean, it can't take care of Karn the Great Creator, but if control decks are increasingly running a suite of 3-mana Planeswalkers, then it will really come in handy.
Yeah, it's just interesting. I feel like we've really seen a move towards Assassin's Trophy, and that's been less good for me because I run 4-mana walkers like Chandra and Koth, and Abrupt Decay does not hit them. So you do trade off a little bit in not being able to blow up 4 CMC and higher cards, but I wonder if the consistency of hitting those lower cost walkers is worth it.
So there you have it, folks. Decks are good, cards are scary. Play at your own risk. We're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we are going to wind down with a listener question. Stay with us.
So what's in the mailbox this week, Stan? Have you gone down to the end of the path?
We have a mailbox now. We have a Patreon question thread.
Yeah, we sure do. And one of the cool things about our Patreon is it's a place for some of our oldest and most loyal fans to come together. And a person that we've mentioned on a previous episode, Hunting Guy from Reddit, turns out his name actually is Hunter in real life, or so he claims, pitched a really good one that people have been asking on Reddit a lot, not just to us, but I think it tends to come up in the modern conversation a lot, which is now a good time to buy into the format?
Well, and he kind of gives a little bit of a context for that, right? Like, there's so many combo decks. He mentions like 4 or 5 different newer combo decks or decks that kind of operate like a combo-ish strategy. And so I think he's kind of sort of asking, does it even feel good to be playing Modern right now? Like, is Modern fun enough to buy into? I think is kind of what he doesn't really say, right? Did you read it that way?
I did not read it that way, no. I mean, I think a lot of people worry about the cost of entry, which is reasonable because decks are hundreds of dollars or, years of collections turning into a strategy.
Yeah.
And for that reason, I wondered, there's never really a good time to buy into Modern. You just have to take the plunge and then just start building towards a strategy that you find is enjoyable for you.
So I will take a little bit of exception to that. I do think there is one time that is a very good time to buy into Modern, and that is if you're going to try to buy a large swath of the format, anytime that fetch lands are being printed in a set is a good time to buy into Modern, just kind of by definition. So anytime you can get those for less than they are right now, or when they're on the downswing, that's a good place to start. Because it's really all about, for me, I mean, my biggest recommendation would be think about what mana bases you can get and get access to, and then try to build decks around that instead of trying to go the other way around, which is picking a deck and then trying to build it from there. Because I think that'll give you the most kind of economic path to reasonable path to building a deck that is actually competitive or a tier deck.
Yeah, but like then you see what happens when they said, there's not going to be any more Masters sets. We have Modern Horizons coming. It's not going to contain any currently Modern legal cards, and fetch lands go up in price by quite a good amount.
Yeah,
because it's just like when are people going to be able to rely on those being printed again? And I think it's kind of something that Hunter gets at in the later part of his question. He says, there's so many changes hitting the format right now. We have the London Mulligan potentially. We have Modern Horizons. We have War of the Spark making big changes. Like, do these changes, do you wait for them to settle out, or do you kind of ride the uncertainty? Like, what's the best time to actually figure out what do I want to play? What cards do I buy? What decks do I buy?
So my answer to this question really depends on how often you think you can play Modern realistically and where you're playing it. So if you know there's an active Modern scene in your town and in the nearby Tri-County area, whatever, if you know that you can go out there and play Modern once a week or every other week consistently, consider it. Or if you know you're going to play online and you have time for, a competitive league every week, or you're going to sit down and play that big Saturday league they have, consider it. But if you're going to buy a Modern deck and it's going to sit there until your friend visits you every 3 months, reconsider it. So
That's what Dave planned.
Yeah, exactly. So I think if you know you're going to be able to play it and consistently get in reps, buy in. But if you are unsure about the amount of time you can play, really think about it and think about how much that purchase is going to bring, how much joy it's going to bring you versus anything else.
I think, Stan, you actually set a pretty good example of like a pretty smart method into buying into Modern, which is, you do it, I think, a little bit more thoughtfully than I do, in terms of saying, I'm going to start with this, then I'm going to take the pieces I have here, and I'm going to slowly grow that collection into other decks that work, with a number of cards I already have.
I'm a little emotional, Shane. I feel like this is the nicest thing you've ever said to me.
Wow, that's kind of sad.
It's up there.
Well, you're onto something, and it reminds me of what Dave mentioned earlier with fetch lands, because a lot of my Modern journey as a player and a collector has had to do with the fact that I bought 4 Scalding Tarn when they were reprinted at Modern Masters, and they were remarkably cheap. Like, people might not believe it.
Like $40
I got them for like 40 or less, and now they're like close to 100. So
they're over 100.
They're over 100. They're $500.
$750 a piece.
So that has to do with a lot of like why I tend to play blue-red decks and why I've been on Is It Phoenix lately and why I used to play Blue Moon. It's just because that's the land base that's been available to me that I can do a lot of different strategies with.
It's actually super similar to me, is that the way that I got started in Modern is I bit the bullet and bought 4 Zendikar Scalding Tarns like in 2013 and just kind of went from there.
I think this makes me think right now, buy 2 to 3 of every Shockland.
Yes,
because they are currently in print. Dave is shaking his head.
They're actually really expensive because they have demand. They have demand from Standard right now.
So the window was missed then.
The window is missed a little bit, or you're probably going to want to wait.
Just wait till rotation. I think the answer is waiting till rotation to stock up on shocks.
Because Shocklands are like $15 right now, and 6 months ago
right.
they were
because they see play in Standard
$7.
So everyone's talking about buying into mana bases. I think that is a good way to get into Modern. But if you're someone who doesn't have a bunch of cash to blow on mana and cards later, I think that's totally cool if you want to buy into a Modern deck. But I think you need to really do your research and be really sure about the deck you like. I bought Skred as a whole deck because I knew it was something that interested me. I had played it in Standard, I like Blood Moon, etc. So I knew ahead of time, although I wasn't going to play the deck a ton, it was a good deal, and I knew I was going to like it, and I thought it was going to continue to be good. So if you're going to drop a good chunk of change on a Modern deck, I would at least be aware of the play patterns and know that you like it. Because I think if I had bought into 8-Rack in that moment, I don't know what I'd be doing right now, because I think ultimately I don't like the deck that much. So who knows if I still be playing Modern even.
Yeah, I'm on board with you there, Zach. I think people want to spend money because buying things is fun. But I think in terms of my like fundamental takeaways, in terms of like what I tell people who are like, I want to buy into Modern, or hey, what should I do with Modern? It's proxy some cards and play with your friends, or play online and use like a deck rental service like manatraders.com. Still not a sponsor, but we all use them and like them. You spend $30 or $35 and in 1 month you could play a dozen different Modern decks and have some reps with them. Test a bunch of different stuff, play online. You don't have to drop that $1,200 on a deck that you're not really sure of. Just take your sweet time and you can make a really good decision and get something you're going to like playing for a long time.
But, we are, like we've said a couple of times, and I think everybody is starting to acknowledge, we're about to get spoilers from Modern Horizons in
a week.
3 weeks?
No, spoilers start next week.
They start next week?
Yeah, you're always off on this time frame, dude.
I always think it's behind.
They start next Sunday, they start Sunday the 19th.
Oh my goodness.
Dang.
We will have like a day and a half for next episode of spoilers.
Wow. Well, we'll see how many we actually have to share from that are worth talking about. But, that shift is going to happen right now. And I got to say, in the sense that Standard sometimes feels unsettled and Modern feels very unsettled right now, I think that is fair.
Yeah.
That feels 100% true. And I think it's mostly because War of the Spark did a lot more than people were anticipating it was going to.
Sure. Well, that's our dive down for this week. Let us know what you think about the decks we talked about in our main section, what your tips are on buying into Modern. Do you agree with any of our takes? Shoot us a tweet. Let us know on Reddit. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to our podcast so you get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. And if you use iTunes, please leave us a rating and review. Also, remember to join our Patreon. It's a great way to support the show directly and help shape the Dive Down's future. Check it out at patreon.com/thedivedown. If you'd like to submit a question to the podcast or pick our brain in something in Modern, you can tweet us at thedivedown, all one word, or email thedivedown@gmail.com. If you see us on Reddit, feel free to send us a message there as well. As always, special thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music. And until next week, get out there and test new decks!
You guys are all paused.
Did we lose Shane?
We might have lost
I
him.
think we lost Shane.
Did I lose my internet?
Hotel internet.
I'm shocked that it managed to last this long.
God.
I know.
Okay.
He paid for the
Well-
fast stuff too.
Yeah.
Hope that manager's going to get near full.